Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Testing, 1, 2, 3. No, evidently, it's broken. My performances are too active. Okay, it's time to begin. Glad you're here. We didn't finish the outline from last time we were together, so I'm going to quickly finish that. Isaiah chapter 40, verses 1 through 11. Then we're going to get in our outline for today. What we want to realize during this new section that we're going into is that this is a time when Isaiah is addressing the exiles. It's a long period of time, 70 years, and God is speaking to the people because they're going in. They're going into exile. There are people already in Babylonian captivity. Many of them are disillusioned. Where's God? How come He's not protecting us? And they begin to question where God is. If God is going to help us, has He forgotten about us? Is He going to do anything? And that's what takes us into the new section today. God responds to that disillusionment from the people who are in captivity. But as I indicated last time we were together, the verses 1 through 11 is sort of like a preface, I think, of this section, because it's already acknowledging in a prophetic sense that the exile is over, that the judgment against sin has been completed, and I think this is serving as words of encouragement to indicate to those who are in captivity that it's temporary. You're going to have to, hang in there for a period of time. And God is using this captivity, as David has also said, and I did last week, to purge idolatry from the minds and the thinking of the people. In fact, he'll say throughout this particular section, when you have come back to me, which is, implying that those in captivity are still given a chance. The captivity actually is serving as the patience of God for these people to come back to Him. And once this is achieved, which Jeremiah has already indicated, it's going to be a 70-year period, that God will bring them back home. Isaiah looks at the path from Babylon back to Jerusalem as the highway of holiness. God's going to be leading, and we have a lot of New Testament passages that are used by the writers of the New Testament from this particular section that have a similar identity to them, a similar type of thought and theme. Because as a voice cries out, as we notice in Isaiah 40, there's looks like to be 4 different voices that are converging to give this message of ultimate hope to the people in captivity. You've got God that starts out, comfort my people, and then you got a voice, that is calling out to make the path straight for God. Then you have another voice that talks. And it seems like you have the prophet who then engages in order to encourage the exiles. Now, we looked at the 3 voices already, and I wanted to look at number 4, if you have the old outline, the rest of chapter 40, verses 9 through 11 on the first outline. So you can read in your Bible if you don't have the outline. But you'll notice as we read these, you're going to have a lot of New Testament verses come, to your mind as you read these chapters, because they are, inundated in the New Testament either by exact quotation or by allusion. You can just recognize a lot of the language and the themes that Isaiah is talking about. Now, I believe Isaiah wrote all of Isaiah. From a critical standpoint, there's a theory that there were 3 Isaiahs. In other words, not 3 prophets, but 3 different writers. You got Isaiah, who is the prophet Isaiah. Then this section, you got Isaiah 2 from chapter 40 to about 55, and then 56 to 66, you have Isaiah 3. Now, from the standpoint of my worldview, and as a prophet, Isaiah could have been inspired, and was inspired in my view, to address all the needs of the exiles and those who are returning. Now, there is strong possibility, since there is a school of prophets, and Isaiah had his disciples, which we have looked at in Isaiah chapter 7 and 8, I believe. Let me go back to Isaiah chapter 8, actually. Let's see. He says, I will wait for the Lord who is hiding his face. This is verse 17 in chapter 8. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells on Mount Zion. When they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it has become, they do not have any dawn in them. They will pass through the land hard pressed. So Isaiah is indicating here this, section completing his prophecy about Hezekiah, that, the signs and those whom he has taught have been given the word from him. And so if, in my judgment, Isaiah is the prophet, is the writer of all of it, but if there is an individual that continued the message of Isaiah, I have a problem with that, him being viewed as Isaiah. But if it's a disciple of Isaiah and he's being inspired, that doesn't bother me. But the way that you'll hear critics and individuals who will, address this issue about the time periods that are covered. Isaiah is not old enough to cover the exile 70 years and then the time period afterwards. But he is a prophet. And God, as he's been shown in earlier parts of Isaiah, has talked about things 100 of years, in the future. Just like he indicated to Hezekiah. When Hezekiah opened up the treasury house of the temple, you remember, God said, they're going to take you into captivity, the Babylonians, and take your children. Well, that's like 100-something odd years, 120 years before it actually happens. So if Isaiah can talk about things like that, then he can talk about people in exile and people after the exile. Because who's guiding him anyway? What's the message that's being, driven through him as a representative of God being a spokesman for him? So let's look at verse 9. We have this is the what I consider the end of the preface. He says, you who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up, do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. Now, this phrase, here is your God, is going to be a structural element in some of the things that we read later after we get past verse 11. there's going to be an emphasis to the people in exile to wait. Wait is often synonymous with what? To wait on the Lord. Faith, isn't it? To wait and to watch and to get ready. Why? Because God tells them through the prophet that, number one, I'm with you, I've made some promises, I'm going to deliver you, bring you back home, and I will punish the nations who, have caused you harm. So they need to believe that, but it's not easy to, if you put yourself in the situation, you've been driven into exile, you've lost everything, you're in a foreign land, you might begin wondering, where's God in all this? And so that's why Isaiah is addressing the exilic period, people in captivity. See, here is your God. See, the sovereign Lord comes with power, and he rules with a mighty arm. See, his reward is with him, and his recompense accompanies him. And then verse 11, after talking about the power of God, his mighty arm, the right hand of God has always used his arm. When it's stretched out, it can be stretched out for judgment. His judgment is, being executed. It's not complete as long as the arm is stretched out. Or it's an indication of power. It's kind of like, when God raises his arm, the Red Sea divides, or, things happen. So it's a metaphor for the power of God. But then he goes in verse 11 from all this talk to a very comforting statement, and it will also happen in the next section. He says, he tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms and carries them close to his heart. He gently leads those that have young. Now, this is a description of God and his relationship with the people in exile. When they come, God's going to be leading them. So look at the imagery there. Tell me some things about God you see in this particular verse. What's being communicated? What impacts you? Yeah. Contrary to what others might be thinking or saying, God hasn't forsaken them. He loves them. He has compassion on them. Now, this is kind of opposite of what David's been reading about in Ezekiel when God's patience has run out, and God has left Jerusalem. Well, that's during the downfall and the destruction of Jerusalem. But those who have gone in exile, the remnant, God is still patient. God is telling them not to lose heart and describing God in a way that's really unusual of any gods or goddesses that the pagans have. This imagery is truly, how should I say, Jewish, Hebraic. God's the shepherd, and you can recall in the New Testament, John 10, who borrows this idea in the New Testament. Who's the good shepherd? Jesus is. Jesus is the good shepherd. He knows those who are his. They follow his voice. All of that is being connected, when Jesus identifies himself as the shepherd. This is God who's going to be a shepherd to his people while they're in exile. And there's lots of things to me. Number one, how does a shepherd work with the sheep? What's your images of a shepherd and sheep? Okay, they lead. The shepherd leads, which is kind of interesting. In order for sheep to follow a shepherd and sheep really need to know each other, don't they? With any animal, domesticated animal, your pet or whatever, except a cat. You got to really work with a cat. But my mom could. She can get any cat to come to her, calling its name or whatever. squirrels she has domesticated, that come to her. But it's because she told me one time, when I was in Tallahassee, we used to have these little bitty, little bitty tiny frogs everywhere. They're on our window and all this. And my mom told me one day, says, "You know what? You can train those little frogs." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Just tap on it, start talking to it every day." I said, "Mom, I'm not going to do that." But she would, and you'd probably have a frog coming over there to her, call it by name. But this is the way God is indicating his relationship with his people as a shepherd, which is kind of in stark contrast to a king, a ruler. A shepherd has, even though God is that, a shepherd has what would you say, a more softer, intimate, compassionate type of connotation to it. And so he tends his flock like a shepherd. He gathers the lambs in his arms. That's an interesting figure. And you got to love that. And he carries them close to his heart. So this is to give encouragement, I think, to those who are going into exile, who are already there. He's giving a view of hope and encouragement that it's temporal and they'll be coming home and God will be carrying them and leading them home. Okay? So we're going to leave that section and go into the next one where the last of chapter 40 is a description of who God is, really in contrast to idols. This is the problem of Israel, right? Idolatry. That manifests itself in different kinds of forms, in your sexual perversion, the way they interact with one another, business, how they rule. Because what you believe in, what you bow down to, what you follow is what, influences you to behave the way that you're behaving. So that's why you know the tree by its fruit, right? You can't get away from that. A follower of God, one who's obedient to him, has faith, will not be producing the kind of fruit that idolatry does. That's why Jesus continues to talk about bearing fruit. That's the evidence of us following God. That's what it produces. There's a certain kind of fruit, the fruit of the Spirit. These are of God. Those represent the natural result of a child of God. It's not something that you're trying to produce, because when a tree produces its fruit, it does it naturally, right? And so as a child of God, it's not that we're forcing something out that's not true or different. It's letting your light shine. Just let it, which is the fruit of what happens when a person is a Christian and follows God. So, several things I highlighted in this new sheet, and I wanted to, you might have different labels for this. I'm looking at the reading. I'm going, what does this tell me about God? What is it saying about him? And there's probably lots of things that you could think of that are, similar or different from what I have, and you could even divide this section into different sections and what impacted you. But this is what, I see sort of as the peaks and the headings in the latter part of chapter 40. So the first thing is God's power. Listen to what he says. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand? Now, when he talks about the waters, he's talking about all the waters of the earth. Measure them in the hollow. That's a little bit, isn't it? It's a little bit. That's God. That's what it is in comparison to the magnitude and the power of God. That's what it's like. He says, and he marked off the heavens by a span. A span is from the tip of your middle finger to your wrist. Okay, that's a span. A cubit is a little longer, from your elbow to the tip of your middle finger there. That's a cubit. A span is this. So he's measured what? He marked off the heavens by a span. All of these things are indicating how minuscule things are in comparison to the great powerful being that we know as God. He says he calculated the dust of the earth by a measure and weighed the mountains in a balance and the hills in a pair of scales. Okay, you see the magnitude and then the small thing. So, you got some scales here, you're going to put the mountains. It's just the image is kind of interesting. It's to cause us to pause. Don't just read through this as if we're just reading words. Think of the imagery. He's using things that are tiny in reference to who God is. How else can you describe God except using figures, as we talked about? So we got God's power, his creation, what he did. Okay. There's language like this throughout the Bible. Job, the other prophets indicate God's power in comparison to things. God's power is viewed, he stretches out things, he makes things. There's three verbs that are often associated with God. One of them is uniquely God's, and that's bara, which is to create. He's the only one who can bring something out of nothing. There's asa is the word to make, to make something. And then you've got another word that means to form or to craft. And those three verbs actually are used in this section in which God, creates, he forms things, and he kind of gets integral, like an artist would be, detailed on various things. And this is used to describe the universe. Think about that for a moment. The deeper you go into something, the more fascinating it becomes, even on the cellular level or out in the cosmic universe level. What we've seen through the telescopes, the Hubble telescope and others that have been up there taking pictures of things, we're able to see further than we've ever seen before. And it's just amazing, things that are out there. But it's just as intriguing when you go deep. They're still discovering things in the deep recesses of the ocean. And how anything with that kind of pressure of water could survive is just amazing. I remember watching a History Channel, and it was showing some of the marvels of all these animals that live deep down the ocean. They all have lights. They have different things about them. Some of them have antennas, and there's like little lights all on them, and it's just fascinating. Even going down into the cellular level, just deeper, things get pretty amazing. So this language is encouraging us to pause and to think about things. Who created, who fashioned, who formed? We need to be reminded of that when we're experiencing difficult times. Because what crises do and difficult times do is we become narrower in our focus. It becomes me, my pain, my whatever it is, right? And so it's very, very singularly focused. What we have to do is be reminded about the vastness and the bigness of God. And it does have an impact upon us because God is saying, this one who's created, he knows you, he's created you, he's formed you, he knows you, and there's a relationship there through faith in Christ that will see us through any hard or difficult time. God's power. Number 2 is God's omniscience. Listen to what he says. Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Now, I don't think this is the second person of the God, the Spirit of the Lord. I think it has to do more with describing God, his mind, who he is. Who has directed the Spirit of the Lord? Or as his counselor has informed him. With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding? And who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the way of understanding? So why would Isaiah bring this kind of thing up in regard to God, to the exiles? When God's omniscient, do you suppose there's some things they don't understand, that they can't see yet, they don't know yet? Yeah, just like us. There's things we can't see yet, we don't know yet. That's what's God's doing, is he's saying, God knows what you have need of. Why do you worry about clothing and shelter? See that? See the connection? Well, the reason I worry about clothing and shelter and food is because it's what I know, what I can see. But if my eyes of faith were opened up and I was looking more broadly at things, I would see God behind things, aware, working, comforting, providing. A lot of those things we take for granted. But it's meant to encourage the exiles, his omniscience. God is aware, and he's aware of things that you're not aware of. God's aware of what tomorrow will bring, but he wants you to deal with today. And, today has enough trouble of its own, just one day at a time, and allow God to work things out. I remember a passage about that, don't you? Romans 8, what is it? 8 what? 8:28, yeah. What is it? We know that all things. I think some of us might say some things. Part of the things. Maybe one thing. No, it's all things. Out for good to those who love him, to those who are called according to his purpose, right? Well, this is the same kind of message. How does that encourage me? How does God work it out? Well, God knows. That's why. He's omniscient. He knows. He sees what you don't see and what I don't see. He knows what you don't know, what I don't know. He knows how to work things when I don't think there are things to work, How many stories do you need in the Old Testament where you have a person who is supposed to trust in God, and God tells them something, wait before you go into battle, but you start seeing everything around you, and you get nervous, and instead of waiting on God, you go ahead and do something that you're not supposed to do. Well, that's probably, if we think about it, all of us at one time or another. If we know that God is omniscient, he knows. When he tells me to wait, he tells the king to wait. Why should I question that? Even if it looks like everybody else is arraying against me and about to go to war against me. Why should I question it? So Saul forces himself to make a sacrifice so he can go to battle. When he was told, wait, the prophet said, wait, I'll come, we'll offer to God sacrifice, get everything ready, and then God's going to send his team against the enemies. Well, the impatience of Saul was the beginning of his doom. That's hard to learn, I admit. But that's where the omniscience of God aids us. Number 3, God's greatness. Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket. Now, I don't know, do you have drop in a bucket? Is that what some of you have, or drop from a bucket? What? In a bucket. The illusion is of a bucket that's probably been filled up with water and starting to be taken, and you got little drops dropping off of it. You know, just extra water. Whether it's just one drop going in a bucket or it's dripping off, it's small, isn't it? That's what the nations are. Well, think about the nations. Assyria, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Ammonites, the Canaanites, you know, all the nations are nothing but a drip. A drip. In comparison to God's greatness. The nations are like a drop from a bucket and are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. How smaller can you get than a speck of dust? He says, behold, he lifts up the islands like fine dust. Here he's talking about the broader land, like I had the Mediterranean, whatever. The islands are looked at as God just, it's kind of like what we did when we took our children to, the beach, and we make little castles and stuff. Well, that's the imagery of God making an island. Just think of our little playground on the beach, and the water comes, and we have, we've made our little islands, or maybe we made a castle, and it becomes just an island when it sinks with the water. Well, God's using that imagery of His greatness and how He deals with creation. God's, I don't know how to put it. God's on His beach in heaven, and He's made the world, the cosmos. It even gets even more intriguing as He talks about it. He says, He lifts up the islands like fine dust. Even Lebanon is not enough to burn, nor its beast enough for burnt offerings. Lebanon was known for trees. It's where they got all the trees to make things, and also for animals to sacrifice. So you're talking about altars and animals and wood. There's not enough to give unto God in sacrifice. It's just not enough. God's too great, too mighty. Verse 17, all the nations are as nothing before Him. See, that's the speck of dust on the scale. It's comparable to the drip from the bottom of a bucket. They are regarded by Him as less than nothing and meaningless. These are the nations, except one. Who is that? Israel, Judah, the remnant. God used these nations to punish His people. And now He's going to tell the people that they will be released from the shackles of their enemies and will return home. So, what's the greatest power we know? All right, we got concerns, Russia, we got concerns about China, we got concerns. The message is still the same, is it not? The nations are nothing but a drip in the bottom of a bucket to God. No matter how they flex their muscle, what they do, our purpose is to remain faithful to God. Remain faithful to God. We need to see the big picture as well. Any comments? All right. Number 4, God's uniqueness. This is where He's compared to idols. And idolatry, the prophets are really sarcastic against idolatry. Love prophetic sarcasm. And oftentimes, it's done with a sense of humor, because you think about the idol and it's teetering. They're trying to balance it, and they can't get it balanced. And you got to put little shimmies under it. Hold it back with chains so it won't fall. This is some of the imagery that we have in this section. God's uniqueness. To whom then will you liken God? How do you liken a spirit being. This is the reason why there's no image of God. He is not as we are. We are. He is spirit. He's transcendent. There's no way to represent him as he is. Jesus came to represent him in the incarnation and to show us his nature, who he is, what he cares about, what he does, how important you are to him, what God wants to do, the blessings, the hopes, the encouragement. All of that is illustrating the nature of God. So who shall we liken God? Or what likeness will you compare with him? As for the idol, a craftsman casts it. A goldsmith plates it with gold, and a silversmith fashions chains of silver. The chains of silver here are probably the connectors of the idol. If you're making a big idol, you're going to have a head, a body, a torso, and they got to connect. So you got latches or chains. It's kind of like, when you get furniture or whatever, like if you have a chest of drawers, keep it from falling, you could put this thing on the wall so it's safe, so no kid will get hurt or it won't tip over. Well, that's the idea of these idols that are constructed. They're put together in pieces, and they're held together in various ways of these master craftsmen. Did you catch it? Goldsmiths, craftsmen, silversmiths. What does that represent? Yeah, refining. These are people that know how to do things, right? They're specialties. These are smart people who can work with these elements. Yet they're making an idol. That's the humor from the prophets. See, they're going to have these very intelligent human beings that have these very specific skills, and they're going to fashion an idol, and then they'll bow down to it. And they're the ones who made it. So that's the humor of the prophetic sarcasm that's often stated. He says, he who is too impoverished for such an offering selects a tree that does not rot. He seeks out for himself a skillful craftsman to prepare an idol that will not what? Totter, it's balanced, everything. This is one who is, it's showing you how idolatry is rampant, okay? So you got people who can do things, and you got someone that wants to make an idol, so he seeks out a person to do this, and he doesn't want his idol to fall over if there's a storm or a wind. So he wants to ensure that it won't totter. There's different ways that they did that. Sometimes they put the feet in a driven with rods down in the ground. Sometimes they stacked it with stones. They built a foundation to keep it level. But what's interesting, in some of the stories in the Old Testament, when I remember in regard to the Philistines, you remember when the Ark of the Covenant was among the Philistines, and what was it? I can't remember what idol it was. Maybe you remember, was it Dagon or whatever that kept falling? The Ark of the Covenant of God was there, and the next morning this idol was on the ground face down, so they'd have to come up and put it up, prop it up, and then the next morning it's down on the ground again. So what's it? This idol is bowing down to God. See, it's bowing down. The idol is. The idol's recognizing. God is demonstrating. And then I think the last time it falls, the hands break off. So that's the oddity about people trying to represent things with idols. And God's not amused by that, but he's very sarcastic in how he addresses idolatry. Number 5. Did we get all that? Let's see. Number 5. I just think it's interesting to me because this idea of not tottering is prevalent among the accusations against idolatry. The tottering idol. All right, number 5, God's reign. Do you not know, have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? It is he who sits above the vault or the circle or the arch of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers. So what's the figure here? God is reigning. He's reigning on his throne. His throne's on the vault, the arch of the earth, the horizon of the earth. He's the king of heaven and earth. And so it says, have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. It is who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely have they planted, scarcely have they sown, scarcely has their stalk taken root in the earth, but he merely blows on them and they wither. Another way that this is expressed is, the flower comes up, and then the hot, arid wind comes and the flower fades. That's used as a metaphor talking about, the rise of human beings, and they're only there for a moment until God blows it all down. Well, that's the image. And the storm carries them away like stubble. God is the one who reigns. It's not Nebuchadnezzar. It's not the Assyrians. It's not Tiglath-Pileser. None of these self-important individuals who make monuments to themselves are the ones who are really in charge. To whom then will you liken me, that I would be his equal, says the Holy One? It's a good question. Who do you liken God to? There's no one besides him. That's the foundation that was given to Israel. No one like him. Now, what do we look at? We've looked at God's power, his omniscience, greatness, uniqueness, God's reign. Now we have God's creation. Lift up your eyes on high. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah, it's like a photograph. Who likes their driver's license picture? See, how God's creation. Lift up your eyes and see who has created the stars, the one who leads forth their host by number. He calls them all by name. That's interesting. Because of the greatness of his might and the strength of his power, not one of them is missing. God looks up, they're all where they're supposed to be. Now, I've tried to go out and search for some stars and planets, stuff like that, and it's a hard time for me to find some things. God walks out there, yeah, he names, that's the image, because he's the creator. And so he ends with this, which is kind of interesting. He ends again with God's compassion, just like the first section in verse 11 ended with the shepherd. Here we have, why do you say, O Jacob, and assert, O Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord? They're disillusioned, okay? They're wondering, does God care about us? And the justice due me escapes the notice of my God? Do you not know, have you not heard that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, does not become weary or tired? His understanding is inscrutable. He gives strength to the weary, and to him who lacks might, he increases power. Though youths grow weary and tired, and vigorous young men stumble badly, yet those who wait on the Lord, probably a favorite passage of most Christians, I think, those who wait on the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. That's what faith does. This is an image of faith, those who wait on the Lord. What do you mean wait on the Lord? Well, God's made some promises that are not yet fulfilled and will not be fulfilled until the time for them to be fulfilled. What do we do now between now and the day or the time in which they're fulfilled? We wait for the fulfillment. And in that faith, God says you can be renewed and strengthened and be able to go the distance. This is what's being told to the exiles who are in captivity. Who are in captivity. All right. Anything? Appreciate it.